right, correspondent Adesua Giwa now joins us live from the G20 summit in South Africa. Good afternoon, Adesua. It's good to have you with us. Now, the US had warned that no G20 leaders declaration should be issued as they boycott this year's summit. Can you give us an update?
Yes, I can. Good afternoon, Nick. Good afternoon, Brian. Lovely to see you guys this afternoon. Now, what happened this afternoon was very interesting. Usually at the G20 summit, the leader's declaration, comes at the end of the summit. However, Cyril Ramaphosa, the South African president and the host of this year's historic first summit in Africa, started off the conference by calling for the adoption of the declaration, which it has now been done. For sources inside the room say that it was unanimous consensus. Now, the language has changed a bit. It does start saying that we, the G20 leaders, gathered here in Johannesburg, which does give some separation, I would say, for the US, because usually it would say we, the G20 leaders. However, there has been some cover in that aspect. When the South African president was speaking earlier, he actually was not aware that the media could hear him when he said that it seemed that there was unanimous consensus when it came to this G20 declaration. So the declaration has been issued. I've been able to go over some of the language of the declaration, but I think it shows the importance of good leadership in the part of the South African president. And it seems that America has left themselves out in the cold when it comes to the G20 this year.
And Adesua, how significant is this declaration, considering the fact that South Africa is the president of the G20 from now till the 1st of December?
Declarations coming from the G20 are the closest thing that we get to a legally binding document coming from the group of 20 countries, the biggest economies in the world. Now, the declaration features some of South Africa's priorities, gender equality, fighting for gender rights, also risk response, particularly speaking about the cartel restructuring plan. We also have language there about the clean cooking and clean energy, highlighting the deaths in Africa that come from people using firewood and dirty fuel in order to cook their foods as one of the hindrances. South Africa has stood as a leader in Africa, but also for the global South, pushing for better leadership, better equality, and better access to debt refinancing and proper debt sustainability, so that the developing countries will not be hindered in their growth aims by these really strict debt burdens. Now, a lot of these things have been included in the declaration. What we heard over the week is that the G20 Sherpas, who are the diplomats who iron out the language of the declaration, were in conversation for about 5 days, going back and forth about what this language would be, and that they agreed on that language by 8:30 a.m. Friday, South African time. But most of the language had been agreed on Thursday, with some pullback from the Russian delegates, Saudi Arabia, and Argentina. But as we have now, we have the declaration. We have strong words when it comes to inequality and development. And again, the global South is in focus and Africa is in focus. So Cyril Ramaphosa, as the president of South Africa, is really standing as a leader for the continent and pushing these issues forward. Now, what comes next is what we're yet to know.
Very good, Adesua. So is the US absence a loss for South Africa at this rate?
It's a brilliant question. I think the US absence is a loss for the United States and not for South Africa. What we have seen here, particularly in the speeches from world leaders, I just finished listening to Keir Starmer, heard some from the Saudi Arabian leaders here, is that there seems to be consensus that multilateralism is what is going to move the world forward, that everyone needs to work together to bring the world forward. And if we look at what the Canadian Prime Minister said when he landed in South Africa, is that he's here to meet the other leaders who are willing to work together. It seems that the United States has only accomplished isolating itself, and by trying to show its power and show its strength, it has actually shown its weaknesses on the international stage, because essentially they have been set aside. The reports coming out now are saying that South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, his spokesman Vincent, who I just saw inside, said that they will not be doing a handover to a Chargé d'Affaires or an ambassador So it seems that the handover ceremony, which is usually a beautiful ceremony that comes at the closing ceremony of the G20, is not going to be that. And the United States has been marked absent, according to the South African Minister of the Interior, International Affairs, rather, Lamola. He said they've marked the United States absent and they've moved forward. So it seems there might be a handover with no media presence in private next week. So it does seem that the United States, by flexing its muscles, has only shown where its weaknesses are.
And do you think that there might be implications? Are there any risks for South Africa if they go ahead with the leaders' declaration?
Well, Donald Trump has said that there would be implications. We're yet to see what those are. Of course, he has already had significant tariffs placed upon South Africa because of what he termed as a white genocide or persecution of white South Africans. So we're yet to see what the implications would be. But again, Cyril Ramaphosa said to the hearing of the whole world that this was a unanimous decision. And so I wonder if President Trump will want to have implications for all the countries gathered here, because it seems that everyone set aside his the words and his threats and still went ahead with the declaration.
Very good. We'll see how this goes. This was Giwa Osagi reporting live there at the G20 summit in Johannesburg, South Africa.